Hi, I'm Greg Netto, publisher of InfraTalk America. In this episode of the InfraTalk podcast, I sit down with my friend and former colleague, Secretary Toks Omishakin of the California State Transportation Agency, better known as CalSTA. During our conversation, we discuss Omishakin's career and how it has led him to his current role as secretary, the core four values that California leads with: safety, equity, climate action, and economic prosperity, and tackling modern needs in California's massive transportation sector. This is the InfraTalk podcast. Mr. Secretary, welcome to InfraTalk America.
Thanks, Greg. Excited to spend a little bit of time with you. It's been a while since we've had a chance to catch up, so looking forward to this conversation.
And we all know that you've been very busy because your life is an open book. Certainly to Californians and the entire transportation infrastructure community. I want to start. A lot of what I like to do with these conversations is give people a bit of a sense of CEOs around the country and what they're made of and where they come from. And you have a particularly interesting story, I think. We met back in your Tennessee days, where you were born in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Yeah.
We won't go too far back, but a PhD in engineering management, a master's degree in urban and regional planning, and a BA in engineering technology.
Yeah.
Did you have a pretty good idea what you wanted to do with your life when you were going to college?
Not even a clue. just like most people, like as a freshman, you come into college and you have these grand ideas of what you can do, but it never fully plays out the way you expect it to. I went into school thinking about basketball, mostly wanted to be a basketball player, and my major was actually communications and pre-law. That's the route that I wanted to go. I wanted to spend time on TV and possibly be an attorney. But my parents knew there was something else that I was pretty skilled in, and decided to go the engineering route. So I got the engineering technology degree, and after I finished that, I was working for an engineering firm, and my dad said, "Look, you got to keep going to school." I was like, "Oh no, I'm done. That's it for me." And I got talked into getting a master's degree in planning. And it's probably the biggest decision that I've made in my entire career was to go get that planning degree, because it allowed me to be able to understand the very technical responsibilities, like a lot of what we're going to talk about today, infrastructure, but also understand the broader impacts on people and communities. And that's what planning very often is about. So I was able to combine those things, and my parents worked in academia, and they talked me again into going to get a PhD. So anyway, that's a little bit of how I kept going, and I ended up where I'm very fortunate and blessed to sit today.
Must be the planning experience, because back when you served for 8 years with Tennessee DOT, following all of that as deputy commissioner and chief of environment and planning, and then prior to that, assistant commissioner and chief of environment and planning, and engineering experience. So a pretty good pedigree for someone who's ultimately going to run a state DOT. But how did the 8 years at Tennessee DOT, a fine organization, how did that prepare you for, obviously, your first stop in California was, of course, as director of Caltrans for a couple of years, and then replaced an extraordinary public servant, my old friend and colleague, David Kim. He served as secretary for a time. So you showed up at Caltrans, an organization with 22,000 employees and a $17.5 billion budget. Probably slightly different than Tennessee DOT. But how prepared were you for such for assuming these very heady responsibilities?
Look, I think that's a good question, Greg. I don't think you're ever fully prepared. I mean, if you think about people who step into these important roles at the federal level, where it be vice president or president of the country or whatever that responsibility may be, you've never actually done that before. You were a congressman or you're a senator or you were a governor or whatever it may be, and then you get thrust into this responsibility of you're not overseeing a district anymore. The entire country is now your responsibility, and so there's a lot of learning as you go. But it was a big difference. To your point, Tennessee DOT honored Commissioner John Schroer gave me the opportunity to serve there, and Governor Haslam and Governor Bill Lee, but 4,000 people, budget of $2 billion in Tennessee. Transition to California, 22,000 people now, $17.5 billion. But the one thing that kind of stuck with me, and I knew this going in, was that the issues would be the same. The scale would obviously be tremendously different because Tennessee population 7 million, California population 40 million, the largest state in America, so 5 times larger. But one thing was clear to me going in was the issues would be the same, and as long as you lean on people, don't make it ever about you, but the team, the people around you, like lean on them to help you ultimately make a lot of the important decisions that are going to be made, because they're going to have all the facts and the information, because they're more on the ground. Once that happens, you will see success. The part that I'll be honest with you that none of us foresaw was the fact that 6 months after I took on the responsibility at Caltrans, COVID hit, and then we had the worst wildfire season in the history of the state. We burned nearly 4 million acres of land, larger than the size of states of Delaware and Connecticut combined. So I mean, when you're going through those things that were completely unexpected, you were thinking policy and project delivery. That was one thing. Now put on disasters, now add the equity, what I would call the sort of equity crisis that we started to face post George Floyd incident in May of 2020. All these things added together, and now you have 5 times the responsibility you had before. A lot of sleepless nights and a lot of challenges, but ultimately it ended up being about leaning on the people, and of course keeping the governor of the state and people like David Kemp, keeping them abreast of the things that we were doing as well.
They were challenging times. My son, my daughter, her husband, and my 2 grandchildren were actually born in Santa Monica. So we had a lot of presence in California during that period of time. And it's really extraordinary how really state government in California is so challenged so often and really reacts so effectively. So congratulations on crises well handled in your early days with the state of California. And of course, when you were elevated to the secretary's job, that's 42,000 people and 8 state departments that you're now responsible for. And for our audience, ranging from the California Highway Patrol to Caltrans, the California State Department of Transportation, the Motor Vehicle Division, among others. But it's a very large organization, and obviously from an administrative point of view, had to introduce yet another whole set of challenges going into that job. So we don't have to spend a lot of time on the organization of CalSTA, but again, sort of highlights in terms of what you were challenged by and satisfied with respect to outcomes.
I think so. Look, again, it's a similar thing, Greg. I should call you Mr. Administrator because of all your service to this country as well. But
oh, thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Look, the same thing, scale, just different, same issues. I'll tell you, I obviously, most people know me, know I don't have a law enforcement background. I never worked in motor vehicle places that dealt with those issues because I've mostly been on the pure mobility side, if you will, of our work. So scale different, and then some brand new issues like the highway patrol. and working directly with them. But to me, again, partnership is what it ends up being about. The Highway Patrol Department, it's the largest in the country. It's got more than 10,000 people, more than 8,000 uniformed women and men, so largest state police organization in the country. But they've got a great leadership already in a system. So my job's not to come in and say, hey, you need to do this, you need to do that. How do you keep me informed, work together with the governor and the governor's office of the state to continue to do the best safety and security and service for the state? Essentially is what the job is, not to dictate to law enforcement entity what to do. And then same thing with DMV. DMV is making more than 10,000 people who work there. They're making a transition from being an organization where you always have to go into the DMV with your paperwork, to get your driver's license and register and all those things, to a more digitally run organization. So sort of IT heavily focused in making this transition. Same thing there. My responsibility, how do I assist and support this effort to transform an organization that has more than 30 million vehicles registered and into the count? The same thing with licenses. How do you help them transform into this new age of registration for the state? So it's more of a leadership and partnership effort than being on the ground trying to run these mammoth organizations.
Well said, and good segue into some of the topics I'd like to try and just touch on with you before we run out of time. But it's InfraTalk America has we call them our targeted technology sectors, and they include digital project delivery and sustainable composite structures. And what that means is we give particular emphasis to developing programming and content that addresses sort of essentially our mission is the advancement to state of practice of these emerging opportunities and technologies. And you mentioned partnerships several times, and when you adopted. Partnerships became a very significant theme in both your roles as Caltrans director and at CalSTA as secretary. And I look at digital project delivery as an example. In Caltrans, as a matter of fact, we've had a number of engagements with Caltrans over the years, and one of the stories that we're developing is states that are really leading in this space. The federal government just put out advanced digital construction management system grants. Caltrans received one of several grants, but one of the multi-state grants. So really collaborating and partnering, but not just with other states, but with the private sector. So the partnership is really at really core to the advancement of digital project delivery, but it really has to begin with the states. And just last week, I was in Chattanooga, Tennessee, as a matter of fact, for the Ashtaware Innovation Summit, the inaugural summit, and a fascinating couple of days of conversations with folks from all over the industry and several states. And just an indicator that the states have really advanced their game. And Caltrans is really, I think, one of the national leaders. And I won't get into the variety of things that they're doing in that context. But you had mentioned technology in the context of the Highway Patrol. Just your assessment. The role that technology is playing, whether it's advancing digital project delivery at Caltrans or advancing your policy and operational priorities at the Highway Patrol. So the role of technology and how it potentially affects yours and your administration's strategic objectives.
Now, very, very good question, Greg. And I'll tell you that the expectations in California are probably a little bit different than other states on this issue of the interaction between technology and transportation, because it's California. the Governor Newsom likes to say, California is America's coming attraction. So like that's one of the things he likes to remind people of. So if it's happening here, then at some point in 6 months or a year, you will see it start to take place somewhere else in the country. And so the expectations are just a little bit higher. I'll run through just a little bit of some particular areas that I'm paying attention to and some of the things that you touched on. Number one, on the construction front, there's all this money that's coming into our space. Federal, state, there's been state funding as well, local funding. California has what we call self-help counties where, 25 counties within the state have the opportunity to generate revenue themselves. So with this infusion of dollars into construction and building out more infrastructure, people are expecting a return, obviously sooner. It's not like before where people say, oh yeah, it's going to take 20 years to get that project done. And, people are just waiting by to see. No, they as those investments, those taxes are going up or those fees are going up, they want to see that return. And so the more we can infuse technology into project delivery, so on construction sites, working through plans, et cetera, and working through challenges and issues related to issues on site, instead of having to delay and manually note things and bring them back into the office. All those things, they add time. And so there's excitement for me and support for me. I'll tell you, Greg, I know we got a chance to briefly talk about this in the past, that the more we adapt these tools and infuse them into the process for our engineers and construction managers and consultants and contractors, the more we're able to generate efficiencies and deliver the product to the people sooner. Now, the average person doesn't know, that we're adapting these new tools, but right. We on the inside baseball people, that expectation is there. It's not like this, it shouldn't be rocket science. Leadership in the state expects it as well. So very supportive of us continuing to bring on these tools that will help us become ultimately more efficient. But there are some other areas where technology is, I think, making a big difference on the transportation front for us. One is there's something called CalITP, California Integrated Travel Project, where our hope is that we can make travel in the state as seamless as possible. You and I have spent a lot of time traveling to Europe and Asia and all these other places. You see they basically have this one tap system where using a phone, they can basically go from mode to mode to mode without having to go to a kiosk and buy a ticket and, I need this credit card for this. But just one device gets you onto every single thing. And in California, where there are in excess of 300 transit agencies, 30 just in the Bay Area alone, being able to have a wallet that's basically your cell phone that can get you from one transit entity to another. It's a connected system. Same thing with bike share. Same thing with the TNCs that we use, Lyft, Uber, whatever people use. Having that integrated system is something that we're hoping we can do. In 2022, only 5% of the population had access to this ability. We're hoping that at the end of 2024, that number will go up to at least half of Californians being able to use some type of a one-tap system, contactless payment, to be able to use at least the transit side of transportation in our state.
It's an extraordinary initiative and very achievable. And a great complement to what we were just talking about in terms of digital project delivery on the construction side, because the sort of focus, and I've had conversations with your director, Tony
Tavares,
and your chief engineer, Donna Berry, and clearly the top level management of Caltrans is very committed. And that's essential, but not enough. In my old federal highway days in EDC, I used to call it top down, bottom up. It is essential to have top leadership committed and demonstrating that commitment. But if you don't have that buy-in and that engagement of the frontline troops, the program, administrators who make those programs work every day, it's very difficult to achieve. And I think Caltrans has achieved that. You've got that collaboration going. But it's essential because interoperability is what it's all about. It's all about various tools in the toolbox talking to each other and advancing construction projects on a more efficient and effective basis.
Yep.
You're talking about the very same thing that is essentially going to benefit and be utilized by consumers of transportation services. So the technology, I like the way you sort of brought those things together because essentially it's essential to the future of how we're going to move people and goods more efficiently and utilizing less energy. Obviously, utilizing and of course, fix it first is not an uncommon policy around the country. I just heard my own commissioner in Maine, Bruce Van Note, talking about it on a program yesterday. So rural Maine versus and California, it's very much the same principle. Fix it first. Let's utilize the existing infrastructure we have to its maximum potential. Because building new capacity is not only expensive, but very disruptive in many ways. So what I hear you saying is technology is the key to really making that happen at the next level.
Absolutely. Yeah. No doubt about it. And efficiency and being efficient with it as well.
I'd like to transition to climate policy. Caltrans is obviously a global leader in this space and a leader in the country in many respects. The other targeted technology sector I mentioned was sustainable composite structures, but in the context of materials used in construction, and whether and in your case, you probably Caltrans by far the largest consumer of construction materials. But I expect you have other agencies that have capital programs as well. So just generally speaking, as we look at the delivery of projects in the context of climate policy, are you satisfied that California is moving as aggressively as they can to ensure that alternative materials that provide longer life cycle, don't corrode, whatever the particular benefit of what you're addressing, are you satisfied that we're moving in that direction in California?
Another one of the areas, Greg, where the expectations for us are just a little bit different.
Right.
On the climate front, we can't in California because of some of the things that I mentioned earlier about the challenges we face, from everything from fires to mudslides to drought to extreme rain and storms. People are expecting us to be making decisions that are more and more climate friendly. It's an expectation here. There are plans and state laws and executive orders. So I think we're doing the right things. I think there's definitely room for improvement, but we're going after the federal money that's been set aside for these particular program areas to see how we can draw down the federal money. Like the IRA has money that's set up specifically for this for us to be able to use material that is more climate friendly. There was a state law that actually passed 2 years ago in our state, 3 years ago when I was still the director of Caltrans, that leaned us towards using more Portland limestone cement, for example. Portland limestone cement compared to just regular cement, we've identified that it could bring about as much as 10% reduction in GHG annually in our state. So we started to see how we could use more and more of that. And there's now a state law that says we can and should use more materials like this. So it goes beyond clearly what gets a lot of the attention is the VMT and travel mobility related tools. But the construction materials are absolutely critical to our efforts as well.
And it's cement is another terrific example of where alternative materials or improved products of research and development. But I'm happy to hear you emphasize that, because composites are what I know best. But there are a number of other opportunities, I think, where we can look at this comprehensively as very much a core strategy in project delivery and construction in the context of achieving climate goals. And obviously, California famously has some pretty significant goals, represented by the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, CalSTA. Something else that evolved and was rolled out on during your watch. And can you tell us a little bit about the broader objectives that CalSTA brings to your job and your mission?
Yeah, CalSTA is the definition of it is the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure. So it's an acronym, and it came about originated from a new governor coming into office, a former mayor of San Francisco, wanting to push even further on some of the great achievements that Governor Brown and Governor Schwarzenegger had on the environment and climate front. And for us in California, 50% of the GHG challenge, of the bad air quality challenge in the state, comes from the transportation sector. So the governor put forth 2 executive orders, one in 2019, one in 2020, that essentially said transportation needs to be cleaned up. And beyond issues like ZEV, zero emission vehicles, that we, by the way, no surprise, we lead the way on again, but into our practices as well, like how we're building out the transportation system. You referenced a fix it first, Greg, approach. So those executive orders from the governor led to the creation of CalSTA, and CalSTA had 34 goals, sort of action items and goals in it, and sort of a 5 to 6 year horizon. So within his tenure, believe it or not, we are 3 years into CalSTA, and by the end of June, by the end of next month, we will be done with all 34 action items. That's how aggressive we have been in taking this on. So we're done with 25. 9 more would be completed by the end of next month. So something that was going to take 5 years, we've done in 3 years, and we're working on CalSTA 2.0 already because of how aggressive we've been and the expectations of the people of the state and this administration.
And disasters. The effects of climate change are so readily visible to all Americans now, and California, sadly, has become somewhat of a showcase for that, simply because of the scale of what you've been dealing with, whether it's floods, whether it's fire, the consequences of climate change have become readily apparent. And I think that when you look at polling, the American people see it. The American people have embraced that reality. And sadly, there is still political resistance in certain quarters. But by and large, one of the things that's impressed me most in the last decade or so is how the business sector has evolved to be not only accepting of these realities, but champions of climate change and community investments that, that enable broader transportation choices for community members, which all contributes to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and improves improves the lives of people in those communities. And, California certainly has been on the leading edge of all that for many years now. So, partnerships, in your case, include communities and the work you're doing with communities to advance these objectives. How important is that, the collaboration that you engage with the communities around the state? Critical. And all transportation is local?
Absolutely. Seriously. At the end of the day, it's people within communities that are looking to use the system. sometimes I think we spend a lot of energy within our state DOTs looking to see how we can get people who are traversing our states, who are traveling through, making sure that they can get through efficiently and safely. But that's not the preponderance. That's not the large number of the people who are using our system. It's the people within communities and cities, and in some cases, rural areas. So it's always been my position that we should focus on what communities need, not just what the state wants to do, but what do our cities need, and develop and grow the system based on that joint partnership. And you referenced the climate component of this. Look, there's some people, some states that still struggle with this issue. But the common saying around here is, if you don't believe the science, believe your eyes. To your point, like it's happening. Like this is not normal what we're seeing. We may try to normalize it and just say, oh yeah, having 30 trillion gallons of water pour down on the state of California in the first 2 months of 2023 is normal, but it's not. The records show it. To have that much rain come down and flood so many communities, it's not typical. It's atypical, and so we play a big role in that, and seeing that we can do our best to combat that direction that we've been going in, and in a state with more than 30 million registered vehicles, we know it's contributing to the challenge, and so developing and growing a system that is multimodal, that has more infusion of ZEVs, is a critical part of being able to get there.
And really a national movement now, thanks to the National Infrastructure, in the EJA, as we call it. But the National Infrastructure Bill has launched those initiatives in most every state. So it's good to see that, and the partnership side. Just reminded me, Caltrans, and we were talking about the composite technology, and we've had. I'm a member of something called the Transportation Structures Council of the American Composites Manufacturing Association, and over the last 3 years, what they've been doing as an industry isn't lobbying to object to some of these provisions that were coming through on the National Infrastructure Bill, but actually preparing themselves to meet those requirements. So, for example, they've developed a tool that is soon to be released to help their manufacturers easily comply with environmental product declaration requirements, which is going to force that practice. That policy is certainly going to compel users to find materials that obviously score higher on the meter. And the first test in making a system like that work is measurement. You have to measure what these products are going to contain and how they're going to contribute to a cleaner environment. So industries using that's one example. There are other industries essentially doing the same thing. So EJA really compelled a collaboration between private sector and obviously principally state DOTs and a number of larger local agencies to really make a commitment to make this happen. So it's an example of how policy can drive practice. And when you collaborate with the private sector, particularly in technology, where the innovation is coming from the private sector, collaboration and partnership with them is essential. And I think in the case of helping the private sector, whether it be manufacturers, distributors, whatever the case may be, find solutions to essentially make the process of complying easier and more effective. The other thing it does, Mr. Secretary, as you know well, all the data that is generated from all this evolution of technology, the data itself is going to be gold for agencies who effectively own that data. We don't even know the benefits of that data in the future yet. We already know a substantial amount of it is benefiting us in present day. But so the partnership element is so important, I think, in terms of public agencies and the private sector collaborating on making these things happen.
Yeah, so I think that's, Greg, another important issue. The fact that IIJA is providing leadership on this issue that sometimes, we can work on in our silos of excellence, as I like to call them. Industry is doing one thing, local government's doing one thing, academia, state government, federal government. But when the federal government steps in and says, we're going to provide funding to support, low carbon material grants, and they set aside $2 billion to assist with this, that makes a big difference. And not only are they saying, here's $2 billion that we're going to manage for you to apply, they're saying, look, we're also opening up the criteria for who's eligible. And so, NPOs, cities, private entities can work with them to be eligible to be able to apply for some of this money. It makes a big difference in leaning, again, our industry towards smarter construction materials that we'll be using. Somebody likened it to a nutrition fact sheet that we have on food items. The fact that as you consume these foods, here's what it's going to mean or do potentially to your body. Same thing with the materials that we're putting on our transportation system. We should know more and more the life cycle of those materials, how long it's going to last, and what it's going to do to the environment. And so the federal government bill or IIJ, whichever one we want to call it, being a part of this and leading is going to help us gel more together in partnership, state, local, and private sector as well.
Well said. And just as an aside, just as a follow-up, I talked about the composites organization, and we've had some terrific conversations with Caltrans leadership on ways that we as an industry can engage with them to really provide information, training about a material that isn't terribly, that a lot of engineers aren't terribly familiar with. So again, partnership means engagement. Let's exchange
Absolutely.
ideas, let's exchange information, let's provide training if we can, if that's necessary. So it's important that those conversations constantly evolve. I've always called it my own doctrine of continuous improvement. We never stop, we never rest. But lastly, I had to bring up in our conversation what is the most important issue to you and to any leader of a transportation organization I've ever known, and that's highway safety. And the numbers since COVID have gone in entirely the wrong direction. When I think about this, when I was privileged to serve at Federal Highway, we had achieved the lowest fatality rates ever. And believe me, I'm not suggesting there's a cause and effect there in terms of the leadership. The point is, when you look at the time that has elapsed to now, and we're now experiencing the highest fatality rates in history. Just in terms of other sort of observations about safety in California, and we've discussed the evolution of challenges that have recently been experienced. Any other observations on safety you'd like to share?
Yeah, just in closing, Greg, look, since I've been in this role as secretary now, we've been going down the road of what we call the core four, and making sure that transportation is becoming more and more people-centric. And if we are going to be successful at becoming more people-centric in transportation, those core four things we have to elevate within the state. And that's number one, safety, to the point that you were just making. We were the first state in the country first DOT when I was Caltrans director to adopt a safe system approach. Because we saw, again, the numbers starting to increase in California. And mind you, 30% of the fatalities that we were seeing were vulnerable users, people who were walking and biking and trying to get access to transit. So we put in place that safe system approach policy with that Vision Zero goal attached to it. So safety, number one. Number two, climate action is on that core four list. And the reason why, I think we've discussed it already, we see what's happening in California related to the environment and climate within the state. And to get there, we believe more new energy vehicles, or zero emission vehicles, and a more multimodal transportation system are absolutely essential, and technology as well, to being able to get there. So climate action, number two. Number three, equity on that list. The fact that we know for 60 to 70 years in this country, we've made some decisions that didn't have positive outcomes for some communities within the state. And not just a state thing, just a countrywide thing, where we built freeways especially and gutted many minority and underserved communities. We want to reverse that and be intentional about it. The governor's put money, general fund money, into reconnecting communities, just like the federal government has, and also contracting opportunities for minority and small business firms in the state. So that's a big part of our equity component. And finally, the fourth one on the core four is economic prosperity. Giving everybody an opportunity within the state for economic upward mobility, for everybody from the person who's in poverty all the way to businesses like giant ports that we have in Long Beach and LA, giving them a boost so they can achieve that California dream.
That's such a great, it's an ambitious agenda, but framed with some very well thought through policy objectives. So that was amazing. Last thing I'm going to say is not only have you achieved this significant achievements in your role in California, but it also put you in a position to be a national leader in many respects. And really just last October, at the AASHTO held the first safety summit in Kansas City, which you played a major role in. And so from the standpoint, how valuable is this opportunity to be part of that national scene and leading discussions? And I think in my notes said leading discussions on safety as a sole focus. Can you kind of just wrap up describing what is meant by that and the role you play at the national level?
Yeah, thanks for that, Greg. Look, as I mentioned already, safety, again, is our foremost responsibility, all of us, regardless of where we work, private sector, public, state, local, federal. I was excited that then President Roger Millar of AASHTO led through a TRB conversation that I was on a panel with him in Washington a couple of years ago, brought up the idea of having an AASHTO safety summit. You know, it sounds like it's something that should have been happening before, but, you know, AASHTO's been around for 100 years, but we finally had one where it was all about safety for 3 days. State leaders, my peers from Missouri, just all over. But it was in Kansas City. And I was thrilled and honored to lead several sessions and several discussions that we had. The big takeaway for me, and by the way, the reason why I was asked to lead so many discussions, and I was a big part of it, was because at the time I was the chair of the Council on Active Transportation. And as we know, active transportation was seeing the highest increases in percentages of fatalities and serious injuries related to our transportation system. So honored to be a big part of this national discussion with so many state and local and nonprofit leaders in the room about what we can do. But one of the things that came out of it was a resolution, a joint resolution amongst the Planning Committee, the Safety Committee, and the Council on Active Transportation on some key concrete action items that we can take on to advance our safety goals. And for us, very fortunate that at the end of 2023, based on what NHTSA and GHSA and others are saying, California, for the first time in 4 or 5 years, had a decrease of nearly 10%. I think the number was 9.4% decrease in fatalities. For us, that's 400 plus lives potentially saved compared to the prior year. So it's our hope that a lot of the policy decisions we're making and actions that we're taking by having these national conversations are having an impact within our state, and our people within our states are making better decisions in driving and walking and biking as well.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your service, your commitment, and really some of the extraordinary achievements and yet to be accomplished objectives that you've described today. State DOTs do incredibly important work in this country, and we're really pleased to be part of trying to explain that and showcase it to the American people as often as we possibly can. So thanks again for your service, and good luck in California.
Thank you. President Biden, by the way, has said there's an infrastructure decade ahead. I look forward to partnering with you and many others as we take this on. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the InfraTalk podcast. We hope this discussion inspires you to ask your own questions and encourages you to have discussions with policymakers and your peers. If you want to know more about InfraTalk America, visit us at infratalkamerica.com, follow us on social media at InfraTalk USA, or subscribe to the InfraTalk podcast on your favorite listening platform to be notified of all new episodes and features. And remember, every innovation starts with a conversation, so let's start talking.